Hi students, Dr. Freeman here, and I wanted to talk to you about the reading topics for week 2, the history of the war on drugs. When I ask students, why was, for example, marijuana originally criminalized? I get so many answers, but one of the most common is this one. Well, you see, Dr. Freeman, marijuana was criminalized because the paper industry and the U.S. government wanted to suppress the hemp industry because the paper industry didn't want to have to compete with the hemp industry. Interesting? No, not the correct answer. For those of you who don't know, hemp is a product that's also made from the marijuana plant, and it can be used to make paper, clothing, all sorts of useful materials. But that is not the reason why marijuana was originally criminalized. And I also get this response from students. Well, you see, Dr. Freeman, it had something to do with taxation. Again, interesting, but no, it had absolutely nothing to do with taxation. When you look at the historical record, the reason why marijuana was originally criminalized was because it was associated with an allegedly dangerous population, specifically the Mexican population. So when you look at the historical record, you see a very racist dialogue happening in the country demanding that marijuana be criminalized because we must stop, quote unquote, these dangerous, degenerate Mexicans from sneaking across our border, getting our children high, and tearing asunder the very fabric of American society itself, and short-circuiting the American work ethic with their dangerous product, weed. Believe it or not, that's what you find in the newspapers, and that's what you find in the historical record and in the congressional record, which I have provided for you in your reading materials. Beyond marijuana, what's another question? Well, why was cocaine originally criminalized? Cocaine was originally criminalized, believe it or not, because it was also associated with another allegedly dangerous group, in this case, African Americans. And when you look at the newspapers of the time period, even newspapers as reputable as the New York Times itself, this is what you find. Whatever you do not want to give a black man cocaine. Because once you give black people cocaine, they become bulletproof and you can't even stop them with bullets. Yes, it was put forth the hypothesis of the bulletproof Negro, and people bought into it, and that's when you see the first outcry for national criminalization of cocaine. Now again, I'm not trying to make an argument whether cocaine should or should not have been criminalized. I'm just trying to discuss the history with you. Now, when you look at the history of the war on drugs, it's important because the war on drugs is still being prosecuted. And despite the fact that blacks and whites use drugs at almost exactly the same rate, minorities, blacks, Latino Americans are much more likely to be prosecuted for drug offenses than their white counterparts. Much more likely to be prosecuted. For example, I attended some very nice colleges and universities, and I went to some parties. And at these parties, there often were various types of drugs present. Now again, I have never used an illegal drug, I've never even been drunk. But there were all kinds of drugs present at these parties, and not just light drugs. Now ask yourself, how often do you think the police department raided these campuses? The answer, I never saw it. I've never even heard of a campus raid for drug use on a major college campus. Never even heard of it. And yet, minority communities are subjected to police raids with respect to the war on drugs on a relatively common, frequent basis, which is one of the reasons why there's such a disparity. Now, I also know what you're thinking in this respect. You're saying, well, yes, blacks and whites, for example, might utilize drugs or use drugs at the same rate, but what about selling? Might that be the reason why there's such a disparity? The answer is absolutely not. When you look at the sociological data, most people buy drugs from a person of the same race near the same geographical area in which they reside. So you don't have a lot of people driving from Beverly Hills to Compton to buy their drugs. Absolutely not. Despite the fact that the television show Weeds might have led you to believe that's the case. No. So, Again, the war on drugs is prosecuted in an extremely discriminatory manner. That understood, I want to give you now some more specific information about the readings that you're going to encounter for week 2. In the readings, you're going to see a man mentioned by the name of Len Bias. Len Bias was arguably the best college player in the country back in the 1980s, and he utilized cocaine and dropped dead, basically, from cocaine use. So the implications of his death and how that was utilized politically is something that I think you might find quite interesting in the readings provided. Also, the readings mention something called mandatory minimums. There was a time in the war on drugs where if a judge was thinking about sentencing you, for example, for drug use, he might take into consideration the fact that you had no prior convictions, the fact that you were a college student with good grades, and he might have said, well, you know, I know you got caught with a lot of weed on you, but I'm only going to give you this amount of probation. What mandatory minimum laws did was this. It took the opportunity for judges to take that context into consideration completely out of the judge's hands. It removed what's the word I'm looking for? Discretion. It removed the discretion of judges. So now, by law, if you had this amount of marijuana on you, you had to be given at least this amount of time, regardless of what the judge wanted to do. If you had this amount of cocaine on you, the judge had to give you at least this amount of time, regardless of the fact that you had good credit, good grades, a good job, so forth. And the prison population in America exploded. So that's what mandatory minimums are. Now, also in your readings, you're going to read about a gentleman named Clarence Aaron. This is what Clarence Aaron did. He had one group of friends over here, we'll call them Group A, and another group of friends over here, we'll call them Group B. And Clarence Aaron simply introduced these two group of friends together, and each group of friends was involved in drug trading activity. But when he introduced them, there were no drugs present. He simply introduced these two parties. Now, for doing something like that, how much time do you think Mr. Aaron received? 2 years probation, 10 years probation, 15 years probation, a year in prison, 5 years in prison, 15 years in prison? Are you ready for the answer? I hope you're sitting down. For introducing these parties, Mr. Aaron received not 1, not 2. He received 3 life sentences. He had no prior convictions, he was a college student, and he received 3 life convictions for introducing 2 drug dealing parties. People who commit rape don't get life in prison, let alone 3 life sentences. Think about what that means. That means if somehow he dies and manages to come back to life, he still has to go to prison. In fact, he would have to come back to life twice, and then he would still have to go back to prison. Okay? Not sure if someone could pull that off 3 times. At any rate, these are the issues you'll be reading about. Once again, I'm not trying to persuade you that marijuana should be or should not be legalized or criminalized. I'm not trying to persuade you that cocaine should be decriminalized or criminalized. I'm simply trying to provide you with the historical facts. And these are the facts. Happy reading. I'll try to make the questions challenging so you and your partner have something worthy of your intelligence to contend with. And there will be other videos about other aspects of our intellectual journey together in the days to come. I hope you have a glorious weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.